Welcome to Sleepy Dimensions, where dreams come to life. Tonight, we invite you to unwind, let go of the day's worries, and immerse yourself in a world of fantasy and comfort. Whether you're here for a cozy bedtime story, a mysterious night tale, or simply to drift off to the sound of rain, you're in the right place. Close your eyes, relax, and let our stories guide you into a peaceful slumber. Sweet dreams await. It was a night unlike any other, a night when the stars fell from the sky. I was walking home from the small cafe where I worked, my footsteps echoing down the deserted streets of our sleepy town. The air was crisp, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. There was a stillness in the air, a sense that something was about to happen. As I reached the park, I noticed something strange. The stars above, usually so steady and distant, seemed to be moving, slowly at first, but then faster, streaking across the sky in brilliant arcs of light. I stopped in my tracks, staring up in awe as one by one the stars began to fall, their trails of light painting the sky with shimmering patterns. The ground trembled beneath me, and a soft, melodic hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being stretched, pulled by some unseen force. I felt a strange magnetic pull toward the park's ancient stone fountain, where the light seemed to be gathering, swirling in a brilliant vortex. I couldn't resist. My feet carried me forward, closer to the fountain, closer to the light. And as I reached the edge, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. The light coalesced into a shape, a figure, tall and imposing, with a crown of flames and eyes that glowed like molten gold. He was dressed in robes as dark as night, his presence exuding power and authority. I knew, in that instant, that I was standing in the presence of something divine. Hades, I whispered, the name coming unbidden to my lips. The god of the underworld had returned to Earth. The figure before me was not alone. As I watched, more beings emerged from the swirling light, each one more magnificent and terrifying than the last. There was a woman with skin as pale as the moon, her hair a cascade of silver, her eyes like twin stars. There was a warrior clad in gleaming armor, his muscles rippling with every movement, a sword of light in his hand. There was a figure cloaked in shadows, their form shifting and elusive, like smoke in the wind. I knew who they were: Persephone, goddess of spring and queen of the underworld; Ares, god of war; Nyx, goddess of night. The gods of Greek mythology had returned, stepping out of the pages of ancient stories and into the modern world. The air was thick with power, the very essence of the gods permeating everything around me. I could feel it in my bones, in the air I breathed. It was intoxicating, overwhelming, and terrifying all at once. Hades stepped forward, his gaze piercing through me. "You," he said, his voice deep and resonant like the rumble of distant thunder. "You have been chosen." "Chosen for what?" I managed to stammer, my mind reeling. "To be our guide," Persephone said, her voice soft and melodic, yet filled with a power that sent shivers down my spine. "We have been away for too long. The world has changed, and we need someone to show us the way." I shook my head, struggling to comprehend what was happening. "But why me? I'm just nobody." Hades smiled, a cold, knowing smile. No one is truly nobody. You, child, are connected to us in ways you do not yet understand. The blood of the ancient Greeks flows in your veins, and through you we shall walk the earth once more. The words sent a jolt through me, a strange sense of familiarity mingling with the surrealness of the situation. It was as if something deep within me had awakened, something ancient and powerful. "But what do you want with me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We seek to reclaim what was once ours," Ares said, his voice like the clash of steel. "To restore the balance, to remind the world of the power of the gods." "But the world is different now," I said, finding my voice. "People don't believe in the old gods anymore." "That is precisely why we have returned," Nyx whispered, her voice like the rustle of leaves in the wind. "The world has forgotten us, but we have not forgotten it. The balance must be restored." I stared at them, these ancient beings of unimaginable power, feeling both awe and fear. What could I possibly offer them? How could I, an ordinary person, guide the gods through a world that had long since moved on from their myths? But even as the questions swirled in my mind, I felt a strange sense of destiny, as if this moment had been written in the stars long before I was born. There was no turning back now. The gods had chosen me, and I would have to find a way to fulfill their will. In the days that followed, my life became a blur of wonder and terror. The gods took up residence in the small, abandoned church at the edge of town, a place that had once been sacred but had long since fallen into disrepair. It seemed fitting, somehow, that the old gods would find refuge in a place forgotten by time. My role as their guide was daunting, to say the least. The world they had known was gone, replaced by technology, cities, and cultures they could hardly recognize. I had to explain everything: cars, smartphones, electricity, the internet. Their reactions ranged from fascination to disdain, with Ares, in particular, expressing a deep contempt for the modern world's lack of reverence for the old ways. Hades, however, was different. He was calm, methodical, and observant. He asked questions, probing, insightful questions about the world's governments, its leaders, its wars, and its conflicts. It was clear that he was planning something, though what, I couldn't say. Persephone, on the other hand, seemed to delight in the small things: the blooming of flowers in the park, the taste of modern fruits, the feel of the sun on her skin. She was a breath of fresh air amidst the intensity of the other gods, and I found myself drawn to her warmth and kindness. But as the days passed, it became clear that their presence was not without consequence. Strange occurrences began to plague the town. Storms that appeared out of nowhere, the ground shaking as if in response to the gods' moods, animals behaving erratically. It was as if the very fabric of reality was bending under the weight of their power. One night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I heard a soft knock at my window. I opened it to find Persephone standing there, her eyes glowing softly in the moonlight. "Come," she whispered. "There is something I wish to show you." I followed her into the night, the air cool and crisp against my skin. We walked in silence, the town quiet and still around us. She led me to the park, where the stars had fallen on that fateful night, and we stood by the old stone fountain, its waters shimmering under the light of the moon. This world, Persephone said softly, is so different from the one we knew. But there is beauty here, too. The gods have forgotten that, in their desire for power and control. They have forgotten what it means to be part of the world, to live among mortals. I looked at her, sensing a deep sadness in her words. What do you mean? I mean that the gods are not infallible, she replied. We have our flaws, our weaknesses. We have made mistakes, terrible mistakes. And now, we are at a crossroads. The world is on the brink of great change, and we must decide what role we will play in that change. What do you want? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. Persephone smiled, a sad, wistful smile. I want to live, she said simply. I want to walk in the sunlight, to feel the earth beneath my feet, to see the world through the eyes of a mortal. But that may not be possible. Not as long as the old ways hold sway. I didn't know what to say. The idea that a goddess could desire something as simple and human as life was both comforting and heartbreaking. And it made me wonder, what did the other gods want? And what would they do to get it? Tensions among the gods began to rise as their time on Earth stretched on. Hades and Ares clashed frequently, their visions for the future of the world at odds. Hades sought to restore the old order, to bring back the days when the gods ruled with absolute power. Ares, however, wanted to ignite a new era of war, to revel in the chaos and bloodshed that would follow. Nyx remained a mysterious, enigmatic presence, drifting in and out of the shadows, her motives unclear. And Persephone, she seemed to be caught in the middle, torn between her loyalty to Hades and her longing for a different kind of life. One evening, the tension boiled over. Ares, frustrated by what he saw as Hades' indecision, challenged him directly. Enough of this waiting, brother, Ares snarled, his voice echoing through the church. The world is ripe for the taking. We are gods. It is our right to rule, to bend mortals to our will. You waste time with your plotting, while the world burns. Hades remained calm, his gaze icy. And what would you have us do, Ares? March into battle, slaughter millions, and declare ourselves rulers? That time is gone. The world has changed. It has not changed so much that they do not fear us, Ares shot back. And fear is all we need. Let them tremble before us once more. Persephone stepped forward, her voice firm. And what then, Ares? After the bloodshed, after the fear, what kind of world will we rule? One filled with hatred and despair? That is not the world I wish to live in. Ares sneered. You always were too soft, Persephone. This world doesn't need kindness. It needs strength. It needs power. Persephone stepped forward, her voice firm. And what then, Ares? After the bloodshed, after the fear, what kind of world will we rule? One filled with hatred and despair? That is not the world I wish to live in. Ares sneered. You always were too soft, Persephone. This world doesn't need kindness. It needs strength. It needs power. Nyx, who had been silent until now, spoke in a voice like the night wind. Power is a double-edged sword, Ares. Wield it carelessly, and it will consume you. The gods fell silent, the air thick with tension. I watched from the sidelines, my heart pounding. It was clear that a rift was forming among them, one that could tear them apart, and the world with them. Finally, Hades spoke, his voice low and commanding. Enough. This bickering serves no purpose. We are here to reclaim our place in the world, but we must do so wisely. The mortals have changed. They are not the same as they were in the old days. We must adapt, or we will be destroyed. And if we do not? Ares challenged, his eyes blazing. Then we will perish, Hades said simply, along with everything we hold dear. The days that followed were fraught with uncertainty. The god's presence continued to affect the town, and it wasn't long before rumors began to spread. People spoke of strange occurrences, of visions and dreams filled with ancient symbols and forgotten gods. The world was waking up to their presence, and it was clear that a reckoning was coming. I spent more time with Persephone, drawn to her quiet strength and the sense of hope she carried with her. We walked through the town together, talking about the world, about the future, about the choices that lay ahead. She spoke of a vision she had, a world where gods and mortals could coexist, where power was not wielded through fear but through understanding. But I knew that such a world would not come easily. The gods were too powerful, too set in their ways. And the world was too fractured, too divided to simply accept them. One night, as we stood on a hill overlooking the town, Persephone turned to me, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. I fear that the gods are too proud to change, she said softly, and that pride will be our downfall. What can we do? I asked, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. Hope, she replied, her voice barely more than a whisper. Hope that when the time comes, they will make the right choice. And if they do not, then we must be the ones to show them the way. Her words stayed with me, haunting my dreams and my waking hours. I knew that a great battle was coming, a battle not just of wills, but of the very fabric of the world itself. The gods had returned, and with them the ancient forces of chaos and order. The balance was tipping, and it was up to us, mortals and gods alike, to decide what kind of world would emerge from the ashes. The night of the final reckoning came without warning. The sky turned dark, the stars blotted out by swirling clouds of shadow and light. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, the ground trembling as the gods gathered in the town square, their faces set in grim determination. Hades stood at the center, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Ares was beside him, his sword drawn, his eyes burning with a fierce, uncontrollable fire. Nyx hovered at the edges, her presence barely visible in the shadows, while Persephone stood by my side, her hand gripping mine tightly. "It is time," Hades said, his voice echoing across the square. "The world has forgotten us, but we will make them remember. We will show them the power of the gods." Ares raised his sword, a battle cry on his lips. But before he could speak, Persephone stepped forward, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "No," she said firmly. "This is not the way." The gods turned to her, surprise and anger flashing in their eyes. "What are you doing, Persephone?" Ares growled. "This is our moment." "No," she repeated, her gaze unwavering. "This is not about power. This is about life, about the world we want to create." Hades watched her, his expression unreadable. "And what would you have us do, Persephone? Submit to the mortals? Bow to their will?" "No," she said softly. "I would have us walk beside them, to guide them, not as rulers, but as protectors. The world has changed, and we must change with it. We cannot go back to the old ways." There was a long, tense silence as the gods weighed her words. Ares's face twisted in rage, but before he could speak, Nyx drifted forward, her voice calm and measured. "She is right," Nyx said, her voice like the soft rustle of leaves. "The world is not the same as it was. We must find a new way, or we will be swept away by the tide of change." Hades closed his eyes, his face a mask of conflict. When he opened them again, there was a deep weariness in his gaze. "Very well," he said at last. "We will try it your way, Persephone. But know this, if we fail, the consequences will be dire." Persephone nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "We will not fail." And so, the gods lowered their weapons, their power receding like the tide. The sky began to clear, the clouds dissipating as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The world held its breath, waiting to see what would come next. In the days that followed, the gods made their presence known to the world, not as conquerors, but as guides. They walked among the people, offering their wisdom and their power, helping to heal the wounds of a fractured world. It was a slow, uncertain process, but it was a beginning. Persephone and I spent our days together, working to bridge the gap between gods and mortals. She taught me about the old ways, about the balance of life and death, about the cycles of the earth. And I taught her about the modern world, about its struggles and its hopes. Hades remained distant, his gaze always turned toward the horizon, as if searching for something just out of reach. Ares, too, was restless, his warrior's heart yearning for battle. But even they began to change, slowly, as the world around them shifted. Nyx was the hardest to understand, her presence always fleeting, her motives unclear. But in her own way, she too contributed to the new world, guiding it through the darkness, helping it find its way. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the world began to heal. The old wounds started to mend, the divisions began to fade. The gods had returned, but they were no longer the rulers they once were. They had become something new, something different. They had become part of the world, just as the world had become part of them. And as I stood with Persephone in the park, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky, I felt a sense of peace, of hope. The world was changing, and we were changing with it. The gods had returned, but it was not the end. It was only the beginning. Now, let's move to the next story. I never expected to inherit anything from my Uncle Edgar. He was a man of mystery, a reclusive figure who lived in a sprawling estate far removed from the rest of the family. My parents always spoke of him in hushed tones, as if he were a figure out of a Gothic novel rather than a real person. He never married, never had children, and as far as I knew, he spent most of his days alone in his ancient castle, Greystone Manor. So, it was a complete shock when I received a letter from his solicitor one rainy afternoon, informing me that Uncle Edgar had passed away, and that he had left his entire estate to me. I sat in my small apartment, staring at the elegant letter for what felt like hours. The words didn't seem real. I hadn't seen Uncle Edgar since I was a child, and even then, my memories of him were hazy. How could he have left me his castle? What did it even mean to own a castle in this day and age? After the initial shock wore off, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to travel to Greystone Manor, partly out of a sense of obligation, and partly because, well, how could I resist the lure of a mysterious, magical castle? Little did I know, my life was about to change in ways I could never have imagined. The journey to Greystone Manor took me deep into the countryside, far from the bustling city I was used to. The road was narrow and winding, flanked by towering trees that seemed to close in around the car as I drove. The air grew colder as I approached the manor, and a thick mist began to roll in, giving everything a ghostly appearance. Finally, I reached the gates of Greystone Manor. They were massive, wrought iron structures adorned with intricate carvings of strange, mythical creatures. As I approached, the gates creaked open on their own as if inviting me in. A shiver ran down my spine, but I pressed on, driving up the long, cobblestone driveway that led to the castle. When the manor came into view, I gasped. It was even more imposing than I had imagined. The castle loomed over the landscape, its stone walls covered in ivy, and its tall, narrow windows giving it a forbidding appearance. The towers reached up toward the sky, their spires disappearing into the mist. I parked the car and stepped out, feeling the cold, damp air cling to my skin. The front door of the manor was massive, made of dark wood and reinforced with iron. I hesitated for a moment before reaching for the heavy knocker. The door swung open before I could touch it, revealing a grand entrance hall lit by flickering candles. The air inside was cool and musty, with the faint scent of old books and burning wood. I stepped inside, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. "Welcome to Greystone Manor," a voice said, startling me. I turned to see a tall, elderly man standing in the shadows. He was dressed in an old-fashioned butler's uniform, his expression calm and composed. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "My name is Benson," the man replied. "I have served the Greystone family for many years. I was informed of your arrival. Please, allow me to show you to your quarters." I nodded, still trying to process everything. Benson led me through the labyrinthine halls of the manor, past countless rooms filled with antique furniture, tapestries, and paintings. The castle seemed to go on forever, each turn revealing another hallway, another set of stairs. Finally, we reached a large bedroom with a four-poster bed, rich tapestries on the walls, and a roaring fire in the hearth. It was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the cold, dark corridors outside. "I trust you will find everything to your liking," Benson said, bowing slightly. "If you require anything, please ring the bell by the bed. Dinner will be served in the dining hall at 8. With that, he left me alone in the room. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to take it all in. This was my new home, a vast, mysterious castle filled with secrets. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this place than met the eye. That night, after a dinner served by Benson in a grand, candlelit dining hall, I found myself wandering the halls of Greystone Manor. The castle was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft crackling of the fires in the various rooms I passed. I couldn't sleep. My mind was too full of questions. As I roamed, I noticed something strange. A portrait hanging on the wall that seemed slightly askew. The painting depicted a stern-looking man in medieval armor, his eyes cold and piercing. There was something unsettling about the way he seemed to be staring directly at me. Curiosity got the better of me, and I reached out to straighten the portrait. As I did, I heard a soft click, and the wall behind the painting slid open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit passage. I hesitated for a moment, my heart pounding. But the pull of the unknown was too strong to resist. I grabbed a candle from a nearby sconce and stepped into the passage. The air inside was damp and cool, with the faint smell of earth and stone. The walls were rough-hewn, and the floor sloped downward, as if leading into the depths of the castle. I followed the passage for what felt like an eternity, the walls closing in around me, the darkness growing thicker. Finally, the passage opened into a large, circular chamber. The walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty books and strange artifacts, old maps, vials of strange liquids, and objects whose purpose I couldn't even begin to guess. In the center of the room was a large, ornate table covered with ancient scrolls and tomes. But what caught my attention most was the large, glowing crystal that hovered above the table, pulsing with a soft, blue light. It was mesmerizing, drawing me closer with its ethereal glow. As I reached out to touch the crystal, a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant. "Beware, young one. The power you seek comes at a great cost." I froze, my hand inches from the crystal. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no reply, only silence. I looked around the chamber, but there was no one else there. The voice seemed to have come from the crystal itself. I hesitated, then pulled my hand back, deciding it was best not to mess with something I didn't understand. But the crystal's light continued to pulse, as if beckoning me. I left the chamber, my mind racing with questions. What was that crystal? And why had my uncle left it hidden in a secret passage? Chapter Fae. The Legacy of Greystone Manor. Over the next few days, I explored more of Greystone Manor, discovering hidden rooms, forgotten chambers, and strange artifacts. But the mystery of the crystal weighed heavily on my mind. I found myself returning to the secret chamber night after night, drawn by the crystal's light and the strange voice that seemed to emanate from it. Benson, the ever-watchful butler, seemed to notice my unease. One evening, as he served me tea in the drawing room, he spoke up. "You seem troubled, sir," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Is there something on your mind?" I hesitated, then decided to confide in him. "Benson, what do you know about the crystal in the hidden chamber?" Benson's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Concern, perhaps, or fear. "The crystal you speak of is a powerful artifact, one that has been in the Greystone family for generations. It is said to hold great power, but also great danger." "What kind of power?" I asked, leaning forward. Benson paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "The crystal is a source of magical energy, capable of bending reality itself. But it is not to be trifled with. Many of your ancestors sought to harness its power, but few succeeded. Those who did often paid a terrible price." I felt a chill run down my spine. What kind of price? Madness, obsession, the loss of one's humanity. Benson replied quietly. The crystal is a seductive force. It promises great power, but at a cost that few are willing to pay. I sat back, trying to process what Benson had told me. My uncle had left me this castle, this crystal, and now I was faced with a choice. I could leave it alone, live my life in peace, or I could try to unlock its secrets, to see what power it held. But what if Benson was right? What if the crystal's power came at too high a price? Despite Benson's warnings, I found myself drawn to the crystal more and more each day. It was as if it called to me, whispering promises of power and knowledge that I couldn't resist. I began spending hours in the secret chamber, poring over the ancient tomes and scrolls that surrounded the crystal, trying to unlock its secrets. One night, as I studied a particularly old and fragile scroll, the crystal began to glow brighter, its light filling the chamber. The voice I had heard before echoed in my mind, stronger and clearer than ever. Take hold of the crystal, and you will be granted the power to change your fate. I knew I should resist, that I should walk away, but the temptation was too great. Slowly, almost without realizing it, I reached out and wrapped my fingers around the crystal. A surge of energy shot through me, unlike anything I had ever felt before. It was as if the very essence of the castle was flowing into me, filling me with knowledge and power. Images flashed through my mind, visions of the past, the present, and the future. I saw my uncle, standing where I now stood, holding the crystal, his face twisted with a mix of triumph and despair. I saw the castle in flames, its walls crumbling, its inhabitants fleeing in terror. And I saw myself, standing at the center of it all, wielding power beyond imagination. The visions overwhelmed me, and I staggered back, dropping the crystal. It clattered to the floor, its light dimming once more. I stood there, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. What had I just done? After that night, things began to change. The castle, once a cold and silent place, seemed to come alive around me. Strange noises echoed through the halls, and I caught glimpses of shadows moving just out of sight. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch me as I passed, their eyes following my every move. And the crystal. Its glow never fully faded. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a constant reminder of the power I had touched. I tried to resist its pull, to go about my life as if nothing had happened. But the visions continued to haunt me, growing more vivid and terrifying with each passing day. I saw the castle crumbling around me, saw myself losing control, consumed by the power I had unleashed. Benson grew increasingly concerned, though he never spoke of it directly. He simply watched me with those calm, knowing eyes, as if waiting for me to make a decision. The choice was clear. I had to find a way to undo what I had done, to rid myself of the crystal's influence before it destroyed me. But how? The ancient texts were filled with warnings, but few offered any solutions. The only clue I had was a single cryptic passage in one of the oldest scrolls. The power of the crystal is bound to the heart of Greystone. To break the curse, one must return to the source. What did it mean? I had no idea. but I knew I had to find out before it was too late. Desperation drove me deeper into the bowels of Greystone Manor, into parts of the castle that hadn't been touched in centuries. The deeper I went, the more the castle seemed to change around me. The walls grew colder, the air heavier, and the darkness more oppressive. It was as if the castle itself was alive, watching my every move. Finally, I reached a set of ancient, iron-bound doors at the very heart of the castle. They were covered in dust and cobwebs, as if they hadn't been opened in years. But I knew somehow that this was the place I had been searching for. With a deep breath, I pushed the doors open. The chamber beyond was vast and cavernous, its walls lined with ancient runes that glowed faintly in the darkness. At the center of the room was a massive stone pedestal, and atop it, another crystal, identical to the one I had found in the secret chamber, but much larger and more powerful. Its light filled the room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As I approached, I felt the crystal's pull stronger than ever. It was as if it were calling out to me, begging me to take hold of it, to merge its power with the one I already possessed. But I knew better now. I knew that this crystal was the source of the curse that had plagued Greystone Manor for generations. And I knew that if I didn't destroy it, the curse would consume me just as it had consumed my uncle and all those before him. But how could I destroy something so powerful? The answer came to me in a flash, a memory from one of the ancient texts I had studied. The only way to break the curse was to use the power of the two crystals against each other, to create a force as great that it would shatter them both. But doing so would be dangerous, possibly fatal. I would be risking everything, including my own life. But what choice did I have? With trembling hands, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the smaller crystal. It pulsed in my hand, as if sensing the presence of its counterpart. Slowly, I approached the pedestal, holding the smaller crystal out before me. The moment the two crystals came close to each other, the chamber began to shake. The runes on the walls glowed brighter, and the air was filled with a low, ominous hum. I could feel the power building between the two crystals, a force so strong that it threatened to tear the very fabric of reality apart. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the two crystals collided. The explosion that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The force of it threw me back against the wall, and for a moment I was certain I was going to die. The light was so bright, the noise so deafening, that it felt as if the entire world was ending. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The light faded, the noise ceased, and the chamber fell silent. I opened my eyes, half expecting to find myself in some kind of afterlife. But no, I was still in the chamber, though it was now dark and cold. The crystals were gone, shattered into a million pieces that lay scattered across the floor. The runes on the walls were dark, their power spent. I had done it. I had broken the curse. But at what cost? When I finally emerged from the depths of Greystone Manor, the sun was rising. The first rays of light streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the castle that I had never seen before. The dark, oppressive atmosphere that had once filled the halls was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and calm. Benson was waiting for me in the entrance hall, his expression unreadable. "It is done. I said simply. Benson nodded, a hint of a smile on his lips. You have done what no one else could. The curse is broken. Greystone Manor is free. I looked around the castle, seeing it in a new light. It was still vast and mysterious, but it no longer felt like a place of darkness and danger. It felt like a home that I had earned, a home that I could make my own. And as I stood there, basking in the morning light, I knew that my life would never be the same again. Greystone Manor was mine, and with it came a legacy of magic, power, and responsibility. But I was ready. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. And now, it was time to build a new future, one free from the shadows of the past.